the level and scope of the minimum threshold for prisoners' protection. I am convinced that if this document is actually applied, it can contribute to reducing the phenomenon of recidivism, allowing to combat crime more effectively, increasing in consequence the safety of individuals. Poland believes that prisoners' reintegration into society promoted by this instrument is the key to the success. The rules not only indicate the clear objective, but also pave the way to achieve it. The rules require subjective treatment of prisoners, proper selection of penitentiary personnel, proper classification of prisoners, and individualized reintegration offer for each of them. Prisoners' contact with the outside world. From this perspective of Polish penitentiary experience, these are good and sufficient guidelines. They allow to develop and properly conduct the process of effective reintegration into society. This is confirmed by Polish experience, which includes therapeutic system of sentence informants, which involves prevention as well as alcohol, drugs, and tobacco addiction treatment, HIV prevention and AIDS treatment, or special measures for perpetrators of domestic violence, crimes against sexual freedom, or aggressive prisoners. Prisoners' teaching, including higher education and vocational development, tailored to the labor market needs. Work paid on market conditions and unpaid work, for example, for the benefit of local communities. Cultural and educational animation and sport. In implementation of these programs, the Polish prison service cooperates with social organizations, churches, and persons of trust. The above outlined system operates and is working well in practice. According to Poland, the guidelines developed in the Mandela Rules relating to the prisoner reintegration into society, adopted as the minimum standard of conduct, are a sufficient standard and can lead to spectacular achievement in all member states of the United Nations. When assessing the rules from the perspective of the negotiation, I'm convinced that they provide the maximum standard of conduct which could be realistically agreed by the member states of the United Nations, because they are in fact a set of basic guidelines that require to be specified and supplemented at the level of individual states according to their social, cultural, and political conditions. As I try to prove, the Mandela Rules are a powerful tool in the fight against crime. Therefore, I would like to thank you once again and to congratulate all those who contributed to the development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. It is us who should thank you for Poland's extraordinary guidance and advice and support in making this dream come true. And now, it is my honor to give the floor to His Excellency Guillermo Ryszyński, Permanent Representative of Canada to the UN, speaking in his capacity as chair of the Group of Friends of Corrections, a UN member states-driven initiative providing expert advice, guidance, and support on correctional issues. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, et permettez-moi de remercier à vous les organisateurs pour l'opportunité d'être ici et prendre la parole ce matin. As Canada's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations, I'm pleased to be joined today by representatives of the Correctional Service of Canada, our Department of Public Safety, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to speak with all of you. As chair of the Group of Friends of Corrections and Peace Operations, Canada is honored to participate in the launch of the updated Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, now aptly referred to as the Mandela Rules. Standards and norms such as the Mandela Rules combine the clarity of international legal instruments with flexibility in their application. They give member states clear guidance on what they need to do to strengthen the rule of law or implement critical criminal justice reforms, and at the same time, they allow for each state to implement them in a context of their own domestic needs and individual legal and constitutional frameworks, making them easier to develop and keep up to date as legally binding instruments. The standards and norms, including the Mandela Rules, facilitate the collaboration between experts and non-experts, making it possible to quickly provide governments, including those in transition, with high-quality assistance to help them implement criminal justice measures that respect fundamental human rights and further public safety priorities. By way of illustration, Madam Chair, the Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners provided the foundation for Canada's correctional technical assistance in support of UN missions in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and in Haiti. Today, the Correctional Service of Canada continues to work with MINUSTA and the government of Haiti on implementation of key aspects of the Mandela Rules. Moreover, as a Group of Friends initiative and working with partners, many of whom are here today, we have also begun to develop a training program for corrections officers on addressing the specific needs of female prisoners. Our use of the Mandela Rules and that of other members from the Group of Friends of Corrections and Peace Operations demonstrates the practical and tangible importance of the Intergovernmental Expert Working Group's efforts to update these rules to reflect advances in correctional science and best practices in the areas such as segregation, healthcare, and rehabilitation, to name but a few. We believe that the multi-year commitment to update these rules not only underlines their undisputed standing as the core international minimum standards applicable to the treatment of prisoners, but also highlights what can be achieved when member states, experts, and civil society effectively collaborate. Reflecting the broad support that the Mandela Rules received at the 24th Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, in Canada, the rules have also received unanimous support from all of our provinces and territories from coast to coast to coast. Nelson Mandela once said, "Things always seem impossible until they are done." And Mr. Mandela, who was the first non-Canadian to receive the Order of Canada, reminds us of the fundamental importance of fair and effective criminal justice systems around the world. And the implementation of the Mandela Rules is, I think, a fitting tribute to recognize Madiba's humanity, which is something that he taught us to respect at all times. In closing, I would be very remiss if I did not acknowledge the support of the General Assembly to update these rules and the support of UNODC Justice Section in particular throughout the revision process, and the thoughtful contributions from many civil society organizations and the generous support and leadership from member states that hosted the experts group meeting, particularly the Republic of South Africa, for hosting the 4th intergovernmental meeting which enabled member states to reach consensus on the revised rules. Canada, as a member in the Secretariat of the Group of Friends of Corrections in peacekeeping operations, along with Sweden, Rwanda, and Cameroon, looks forward to supporting the dissemination of the Mandela Rules through advocacy, technical assistance, and other activities. I can assure you, Madam Chair, that we will continue to spare no effort in this regard, and I take this opportunity this morning to welcome other states represented in this room today to join the Group of Friends and to add their efforts to the implementation of the Mandela Rules in future. I thank you very much, Madam Chair. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Ambassador Roshinsky. And the Group of Friends has been providing an invaluable service in making this issue known and prioritized in New York. As the legal philosopher Jeremy Bentham said, publicity is the very soul of justice, and unless we publicize these rules, we don't do them justice, and we don't do Madiba justice. I also thank you, Ambassador, not only for your leadership of the Group of Friends of Corrections, but for your key membership in the Group of Friends of UNODC. And now we will take some initial observations from the floor during this high-level segment. I understand Germany, Switzerland, Bahamas, Sweden, Palau, and Italy wish to make interventions. If you have not yet so indicated and wish to also intervene, please contact my colleague Helen Liu, all the way to my left, and we will do our best to get to you now or during the technical segment. I now give the floor to the Permanent Mission of Germany. You may speak from the floor or from the lectern here. It's your choice.
Madam Chair. The Mandela Rules reflect the minimum requirements of what we today consider a humane prison system. They bring the standard minimum rules of 1955 into line with the numerous relevant international instruments adopted since the 1950s and reflect recent advances in correctional science and best practices. Their adoption by the General Assembly thus marks a major step forward in the protection of the rights of prisoners and in guaranteeing their human dignity. Most importantly, rules regarding protection against torture have now been included. Considerable improvements have been achieved in the areas of healthcare for prisoners and disciplinary measures, in particular with regard to measures such as solitary confinement and withdrawal of food. We also welcome that more emphasis is henceforth placed on prison work as a means of resocialization. In order to highlight the situation of prisoners worldwide, July 18th will mark not only International Nelson Mandela Day, but also Mandela Prisoners' Rights Day. This is an important symbolic step, but more work will be needed to enhance global awareness of the Mandela Rules and support their implementation. We wish UNODC great success with this important task and are pleased to confirm our intention to support the implementation of the Mandela Rules by providing $183,000 for the development of a UNODC handbook to instruct prison staff on the application of the Mandela Rules. Germany also intends to contribute,
and which we hope inspires others here today. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jörg Lauber, Permanent Representative of Switzerland. Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland thanks UNODC and the government of South Africa for organizing this high-level launch of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners and for their support and leadership throughout the revision, a process in which Switzerland has been actively engaged. Although my Canadian colleague already mentioned it, I still think it's adequate to cite the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, in whose honor the revised standard minimal rules are named, and who indeed said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." For many years, a revision of the 1955 SMRs seemed impossible, although such a revision was deemed timely and necessary by many, including Switzerland, in order for them to reflect the numerous and substantial developments in human rights and criminal justice standards since the 1950s. But today, after almost 5 years of discussion, we celebrate the upcoming adoption by the UN General Assembly of this new set of rules. The SMRs are universally acknowledged as the minimum standards to be implemented in order to treat all persons deprived of their liberty with respect for their inherent dignity. Switzerland wishes to thank all those who have contributed to this process, especially the governments of South Africa, Argentina, and Brazil, the UNODC, and the experts from various UN bodies, as well as from regional organizations, academic entities, and non-governmental organizations. The upcoming adoption of the Mandela Rules is timely, as some 10 million men, women, and children are currently subject to various forms of detention around the world. It is also necessary, as every situation of detention puts the concerned individuals in a very vulnerable position. The Mandela Rules affirm fundamental human rights principles, such as the obligation to treat prisoners with respect for their inherent dignity, to protect them against discrimination, and to refrain from torture or similar prohibited ill treatment or punishment. The rules further define the minimum conditions to be met regarding health care, disciplinary issues, including solitary confinement, investigations, legal representation, and independent inspection, just to name some of the most important areas. The timely and necessary adoption of the Mandela Rules by the UN General Assembly is a wake-up call for all states to renew their commitment to treat all persons deprived of their liberty with respect for their dignity. Switzerland calls upon all states to implement the rules in their entirety without delay and, if necessary, to amend their domestic legislation in order to guarantee these minimum standards. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, many challenges remain regarding the full implementation of the Mandela Rules in all places of detention around the world. But it only
It's really a pleasure to be here today, and I very much wanted to thank UNODC and South Africa for hosting the event. And I also wanted to extend a special thanks to our colleagues from South Africa and the government for also hosting the 4th Intergovernmental Expert Working Group, and thus providing leadership and the conditions to complete the work on revising standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the so-called Mandela Rules. The deep and close relationship between South Africa and Sweden dates back to the struggle against apartheid. I'm very proud that we were the first Western government to recognize the legitimacy in the demand for self-determination and respect for human rights in South Africa. Financial support was provided to liberation movements already from the 1960s. I mention that because one of the many areas to which Sweden gave considerable support was in the legal field to organizations such as the International Defense and Aid Fund, and by appointing competent lawyers to liberation activists standing trial, we believe that many human lives were saved and some form of human dignity preserved under very difficult circumstances. In addition, we continuously provide support to organizations such as the Red Cross, which gradually were allowed to visit political prisoners and provide knowledge about the appalling conditions in the apartheid prisons to the international community. So I just wanted to provide this sort of historical background and the perspective as we discuss the revised version of the standard minimum rules of the treatment of prisoners, the Mandela Rules, to honor the legacy of the late President of South Africa, Mr. Nelson Mandela, who not only spent many years in prison, but who also made the situation in prisons a major part of his political struggle. We believe that the Mandela Rules will be of great importance in the continued efforts to provide greater protection for persons deprived of liberty and recognition of their rights, as well as more up-to-date guidance to prison administrations, not least in the area of peacekeeping operations. The first UN International Corrections Conference was organized by DPKO and the Swedish Prison and Probation Service in Stockholm 2009. We're proud to fund and host this event, which initiated a support system to UN corrections reform programs in peacekeeping contexts. We're also proud of being one of the initiators and an active part of the Group of Friends of Corrections in peacekeeping operations, together with Rwanda, Cameroon, and chaired by Canada, which is, we believe, a unique platform. And we would also like to see this group of friends to be able to assist the work of the UN and contribute to raising awareness of the link between correction systems and sustainable peace. I also say that as chairman of the Peacebuilding Commission, where I think we need to recognize further how the things we're discussing today relate to creating sustainable peace, as Mr. Titov and others have mentioned. And we now hope that more member states will join the initiative. Training is crucial for the effectiveness, success, and reputation of the UN's missions. We have been very active regarding pre-deployment training of international corrections officers, mainly by running the United Nations Prison and Probation Officers course, the UNPRIPOC, training officers from all around the world. This year, UNPRIPOC celebrates its 10th anniversary. We are glad that we've been able to partner with countries such as Rwanda and Uganda in moving this training endeavor forward. The Mandela Rules will, together with lessons learned, be an important contribution to the Swedish Prison and Probation Service's work on revising the UNPRIPOC training manual. And I wanted to mention that we are currently analyzing how we can, in the field of training and capacity building, within the framework of UNPRIPOC, enhance our efforts in this field from the Swedish perspective. Cooperation is the basis for success in most areas. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to emphasize how much Sweden appreciates the good cooperation with UNODC, with UNDPKO, OROLSI, and last but not least, the other member states of the Group of Friends of Corrections in Peacekeeping Operations. There has been plenty of quotes from Mr. Mandela this morning. Let me add another one. A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. We believe that the revised standard minimum rules that we launched today, the Mandela Rules, reflects the determined work of many good minds and many good hearts. Their work will form the basis for continued efforts in this field based upon fundamental human rights within countries as well as within the peace operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the distinguished representative of Sweden, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahamas. Ambassador. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I wish to congratulate UNODC, the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, as well as the Intergovernmental Expert Group on the revision of the Standard Minimum Rules. The Bahamas deems it most fitting that the revised SMRs should be dubbed the Nelson Mandela Rules, not because of their content, but more so because of their intent. And the intent is to develop prison systems worldwide to which people are sent not for punishment, but as punishment. Places that are incapacitating on the one hand, but enabling and ennobling on the other. Places within which people are sent to lose their liberty, but not their dignity. Places where justice and mercy peacefully coexist. Programs and protocols. They should all have as their overarching theme the protection of society and the return to society of men and women for whom incarceration was a humanizing, transformative experience. Having headed a prison service for close to a decade, I testify as to the powerful effects of the standard minimum rules in making imprisonment more manageable and more meaningful. And so again, the Bahamas, a strong aspirant to the standard minimum rules, commends UNODC on the launch of this important set of standards, which should benchmark what Nelson Mandela himself refers to as the test of what a society stands for, what its values are, how it treats those in captivity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador Raming, for your very important remarks and for always being a leader on this issue in light of your extensive expertise and commitment over the years. And now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for giving us the floor. Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, President of ECOSOC, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers from Thailand and Poland, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to thank and congratulate the Mission of South Africa and UNODC for co-sponsoring and convening this important meeting. We welcome this process for the revision of the prison rules, now named very appropriately the Mandela Rules, which will be very useful as we continue to improve prison management in Palau. May we join you in recognizing the role Mission of Canada has had in this process, as well as in the groups of Friends of Corrections. Palau also wishes to thank the government of Germany for their most welcome support in getting the manual developed, which would be very helpful. Prison management is an important issue for Palau. Over the years in our young nationhood, we have continued to discuss ways in which we can improve management of our prisons. There is a concerted effort to ensure that prisoners' needs for security, nutrition, and reintegration into the community are addressed well. Prisoners in Palau are given the opportunity to learn the craft of storyboard making. This gives them an opportunity to learn the skills, not only to learn the skills, but also to make money for themselves, as the storyboards they make and sell brings money to them while they're in prison, as well as giving them the skills that can be used to integrate them back into the community. Our aim is always to prevent imprisonment, reduce recidivism, and integrate prisoners effectively into the society. Madam Chair, in Palau, prisoners have the same rights to health care as any citizen. Education is an area where much work is still required. Spiritual needs are addressed through various religious groups conducting meetings during the week as well as on Sunday. In fact, the church choir that I directed had the opportunity to visit prisoners on the 4th week of each month. Recently, we made improvement in the area of underage detainees. In addressing the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we recently made separate areas for juvenile detainees. This was completed in cooperation with the Rotary Club of Palau. In August, in a visit to Thailand, I was introduced to their model program of treatment of incarcerated women under the program of Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Thailand, as we learned from His Excellency, the Minister of Thailand this morning. This is a program that addresses well the needs of women prisoners in a holistic manner. I'm recommending to our government that they look into adopting this model to address more effectively the needs of women who are incarcerated in Palau. Indeed, we would like to be judged as a nation by, among other things, the way we treat those who, because of some behavior emanating from various regions, often become deemed as least amongst us. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau for his important remarks, and now give the floor to Judge Luigi Marini of the Permanent Mission of Italy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Let me first thank UNODC and the Mission of South Africa for convening the meeting just in the first part of the new General Assembly session, and it seems to me a very timely presentation. I wish to thank also all panelists and previous intervention for being effective and to be important in their contents. And so I have just a few points to underline. The first is Italy is strongly engaged in improving all aspects related to the treatment of prisoners in line with international instruments and in full respect of human rights in the daily administration of criminal justice. The important improvements in the field of reducing the overcrowding in the Italian institutes is an important achievement that commits Italy to further steps. For this reason, we have been in the front line of the process, which led to the revision of the standard minimum rules to be adopted as Mandela rules. We attach great importance to the treatment of prisoners as an essential instrument from their reintegration into society, also in accordance with Article 27 of our Constitution. Furthermore, we believe that a human treatment of those deprived of their liberty, respectful of their dignity, aimed at offering them education, work, as well as assistance, is play a key role in reinforcing international judicial cooperation and at the domestic level in reducing recidivism and therefore in protecting against the nature of the prison challenges and its reflection on all aspects of criminal justice and crime prevention in all countries. In conclusion, we commend UNODC for the deployment of its technical assistance programs, which Italy will continue to support fully, all together with all the tools for implementing the Mandela rules. We are sure that all countries will implement Mandela rules consistently with their spirit and purpose, And this will be one of the main intents to be items to be examined within the resolution on crime that Italy is going to propose and to facilitate in the next weeks. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy for all its outstanding efforts as chair of the annual GA Omnibus Crime Resolution, which in its most recent version, 69/197, requested member states to support the process of revision of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners and to strengthen all efforts to address the issue of prison overcrowding. Thank you to all of you who have intervened. We will have additional time for interventions during the technical segment, but first we will show a short 10-minute documentary on UNODC and its work in the field of prison reform. Before we do that, I would like to thank all of our high-level speakers for their outstanding interventions. Thank you for your commitment to making today possible, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue with you as we implement these important rules. In the meantime, we will reorganize the podium to move into the technical segment, which will address 5 clusters of the Nelson Mandela rules. If those colleagues in the technical segment could now join us at the podium. In the meantime, we will show a film about UNODC's important work in the field of prison reform, a 10-minute short film. Thank you, Ambassador.
The worldwide prison population has exceeded 10 million persons and continues to grow. Despite this number, prisoners are rarely part of the public discourse. After all, they are physically separated from society and seem to disappear behind walls, gates, and locked doors. What happens behind these walls? What is done to not only ensure secure and safe custody, but also humane treatment behind bars? Given that the vast majority of prisoners eventually return to society, these questions are of paramount importance for any efforts to effectively protect society from crime. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, assists countries around the world in reforming the prison systems in line with international minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners. Very often, the initial situation on the ground looks dire.
A large number of prison systems around the world are in a state of crisis. Crisis means severe prison overcrowding, poor prison conditions, the spread of infectious diseases, including HIV, large numbers of pre-trial detainees, and high rates of recidivism, all of which come at tremendous economic and social costs.
In response to this crisis, UNODC has developed a comprehensive strategy on addressing the global prison crisis aimed at 3 mutually reinforcing objectives.
The first objective is to reduce the scope of imprisonment by assisting countries in preventing crime, in strengthening access to legal aid, and in increasing access to non-custodial sanctions.
For prisoners. From morning to evening, these women operate their sewing machines.
Do not judge, and you will not be judged. No one is protected against such a life. I always wanted to become a seamstress, but I only managed to learn sewing here. You see how life works out.
The sewing workshop is located in a large building that has been renovated. Before there were only 30 sewing machines, now there are 85. This means the women can now sew more and better at the prison. Prisoners make clothes for the staff of the prison service, other state agencies and private companies. They earn a decent salary, which they can use to support their families and children. Prison staff in prison number 3 have further developed a business plan to replace bakery equipment and boost bread production. This plan has now been turned into reality with the support of UNODC. Employing prisoners apart, there are many other unresolved issues in Kyrgyzstan's prisons. Sanitary conditions in prisons, for example, have become a serious challenge. The project therefore spent significant resources to renovate bath and laundry facilities, water supply, sewage and ventilation systems in 4 prisons, benefiting around 3,000 prisoners.
Prisoners are citizens just like anyone else. They are just deprived of liberty, separated from other people. They are incarcerated to serve their punishment, but they should not be deprived of normal living conditions.
Hargeisa prison. In spite of a serious lack of resources in Somaliland, UNODC's counter-piracy program opened this 590-bed facility in 2010. In addition to the construction, UNODC has provided for extensive training of Somali prison staff, including through the work of international prison mentors who are based in Hargeisa and who provide continuous advice and on-the-job training for their Somali peers. The program also helps prisoners in learning new skills, such as woodwork, carpentry, welding, and house wiring. Once they have learned the fundamentals, they are engaged to work in building and maintenance projects around the prison facility.
It means they are getting the knowledge.
It means they are getting the knowledge how to do a house wiring, domestic house wiring. Once they have finished this course, they are having enough knowledge to do their own jobs, so that is their future.
The new training unit in Hargeisa prison now also runs a concrete block-making plant which has already received orders for 15,000 bricks, as well as providing many of the inmates with skills they will be able to transfer to the outside world. It is an important revenue stream for the prison service, for which budgets are always tight. Prisoners now also have access to a sports area, which includes a large yard and basketball court, an opportunity for physical exercise which has obviously fallen on fertile grounds. In Panama, UNODC assists the government in the reform of its penitentiary system since 2010, with technical assistance services ranging from legislative assistance, capacity building for prison staff, educational programs for prisoners, as well as anti-corruption measures in prisons.
Con el apoyo financiero y técnico de UNODC se han creado nuevos proyectos.
With the financial and technical support of the UNODC, new productive projects have been developed, such as hydroponics and tailoring in various prisons, as well as 4 computer training rooms. One very innovative activity was the launching of the campaign Donate a Book to the Prison. So far, over 8,000 books have been donated, which has enabled the opening of libraries in different penitentiary centers around the country. Also, the campaign No to Corruption was developed and institutionalized, which has simplified the reporting of corruption cases to the telephone number 311, ensuring a quick response to complaints and allegations. The prison service, working closely with UNODC and the Regional Anti-Corruption Academy, has further drafted and published a code of ethics for prison staff. On the other hand, we have been able to develop information leaflets for prisoners, such as on rights and obligations, commutation of sentences, and eligibility for parole, as well as technical guidance material and handbooks for prison personnel. With the support of the UNODC, the General Office of the Penitentiary System has also improved its website, facilitating the transparency and accountability of prison management.
Besides the provision of technical assistance, the UN has a long tradition of promoting the humane treatment of prisoners by assisting member states in identifying and adopting international standards related to prison management.
The UN has never closed its eyes to the plight of prisoners and the complex task of prison administration. Proof of this can be seen in the adoption of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners in 1957. These rules have offered valuable guidance to policymakers, prison managers, and prison staff for almost 6 decades.
As the custodian of these rules, UNODC played a crucial role when in 2011 member states embarked upon the ambitious project of revising the standard minimum rules for the 21st century. After almost 5 years of negotiations, assisted by civil society, a revised set of the rules was agreed upon, which will be known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, a major breakthrough in the normative framework applicable to the treatment of prisoners. Based on its experience and strategic approach to addressing global prison issues, UNODC stands ready to assist member states in the practical application of the.
We must remember that prisoners continue to be part of every society and must be treated with respect due to their inherent dignity and as human beings. I invite countries, international organizations, and civil society to join forces and to make these revised rules a reality for prisons everywhere.
In this technical segment, we will address the 5 clusters of the Nelson Mandela Rules, beginning with a brief introduction of the clusters from my dear colleagues Piera Barzano and Philip Meisner of UNODC's Justice Section in Vienna. Piera is UNODC's Senior Interregional Advisor. With a background in law, criminology, and legal anthropology, she possesses many years of experience with the UN, mainly in Vienna, but also in 4 peacekeeping missions in 3 continents. While she is now providing technical assistance to member states on a wide scope of crime prevention and criminal justice issues, the emphasis of her work remains on penal reform and support to prison administrations. Ms. Barzano has been involved in the revision process of the SMRs since the earliest days, providing secretariat support throughout the process and devoting long hours to the organization of the 4 expert group meetings and the finalization of the working papers. Together with my colleague Philip Meisner, she is probably one of the most thrilled persons in the room today after 5 years of extremely hard work to reach the final version of the revised rules. Philip Meisner from our Justice Section has been working for UNODC for many years with a consistent focus on prison reform, including in both UNODC's Justice Section in Vienna and in the field, where he was managing a prison reform project. Prior to UNODC, he was working with various international and hybrid tribunals. Along with Piera, he has been dedicated to and deeply involved in the revision process of the SMR since their beginning. Piera.
Thank you, Simone. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the revision of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners was limited to 9 areas and to some specific issues and rules within those areas. However, the extent of the changing was farther reaching as the whole set of rules was carefully considered for consistency. So we have around 35% of the rules which were changed or moved, and several new provisions were added so that we have now 122 rules instead of the original 95. Terminology, which was one of the 9 areas, was updated and changed throughout the text. The main advances introduced by the Nelson Mandela rules will be highlighted in the presentations on the 5 clusters, namely, Cluster 1 will deal with some of the most important issues included in the Nelson Mandela rules, such as the absolute prohibition of torture and the respect for the prisoner's inherent dignity and value as human beings. While, as we know, these concepts are not new, they were not reflected in the original rules. Additionally, the non-discrimination principle has been expanded to stress the need for measures to protect the rights of prisoners with special needs as a way to put this principle into practice and to ensure full access to prison life on an equitable basis for all prisoners. Cluster 2 will highlight one of the areas that underwent the most extensive changes, healthcare. Prison health is public health, and on the basis of this tenet, a number of fundamental principles have been incorporated in the rules. Cluster 3 is dedicated to discipline and sanctions, as well as the investigation of all deaths in custody and allegations of torture. These areas have been greatly expanded during the revision process to bring the rules in line with relevant international human rights provisions. In particular, two of the most notable advances in the Nelson Mandela rules are the provisions defining and limiting the use of solitary confinement and those regulating searches. Cluster 4 will cover other areas where the modernization of the rules was considered necessary, namely complaints and inspections, and access to legal representations. In line with other international provisions, the importance of internal and external inspections was highlighted. Enhanced access to legal aid is also foreseen, not only for the pre-trial stage, but throughout the execution of the sentence, including for serious disciplinary matters. Finally, Cluster 5 is our last part and will focus on the variety of professional skills required for modern prison work. Confronted with an increasingly complex task, prison staff needs to strike a balance between attending to prisoners with a variety of special needs and ensuring safety, security, and order. The importance of dynamic security, commonly recognized as a best practice for prison administration, will be stressed as well. Let me conclude by inviting you to take the time to read the Nelson Mandela rules and to appreciate the magnitude of the changes introduced to upgrade these international standards that will hopefully inspire positive change and reform in many prison systems worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Were we going to go to Philip now? Or we just go to the first cluster? Thank you for that. Our first cluster
One guy works for security. I did. Thank you on the way to Peru. I made UN scandal. Most serious locations. I just like it, so okay. It's a public location. Okay.
Schwartz is next. I feel so bad. I feel so bad. Yeah. Yeah. All right, good afternoon. I have a couple of statements to read off. The first one is from the Special Envoy for Yemen. The Special Envoy for Yemen, Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, welcomed the latest statements by the Houthis, which reaffirmed their acceptance of UN Security Council Resolution 2216. The Houthis reiterated their commitment to the 7 Muscat principles that have been previously conveyed by the Houthis. This is an important step as Resolution 2216, other Security Council resolutions, the Gulf Cooperation Council initiative, and the outcomes of the national dialogue have been at the core of the UN-led peace process. These 3 pillars will remain the basis for peace talks, which the Special Envoy has been working towards. Mr. Ould Sheikh Ahmed believes that the government of Yemen, the Houthis, and their allies should accept the invitation to join the peace talks on this basis. And a statement on the announcement of the release of a number of prisoners by the United States government. The Secretary General welcomes the decision by the United States government to release approximately 6,000 prisoners from federal prisons to ease prison overcrowding and provide a degree of redress for persons who offenses. He also welcomes the proposals that aim to consider early release, many of which are drug-related. The Secretary General notes that states should apply deprivation of liberty as a measure of last resort and only after alternatives have been duly considered. Over-incarceration constitutes one of the major underlying causes of overcrowding, which results in conditions that can often amount to ill treatment or even torture. In order to address the over-incarceration and overcrowding and their human rights implications, some states should develop and implement alternatives to custodial measures and review penal policies and legislation to ensure proportionate sentencing. Consideration needs to be given to alternatives to criminalization and incarceration of people who use drugs, with an increased focus on public health, prevention, treatment, and care. Also, a statement on the killing of a peacekeeper in the Central African Republic. The Secretary General condemns the killing of a peacekeeper from the United Nations multidimensional integrated stabilization mission in the Central African Republic that took place yesterday in Bangui. A MINUSCA convoy traveling from Damara to Ngerengu came under fire by an unknown armed group some 55 kilometers north of Bangui. The MINUSCA military escorts, composed of a Burundian infantry company, returned fire. During the exchange, 1 peacekeeper was killed and another injured. The Secretary General deplores in the strongest terms attacks against UN peacekeepers and calls for swift action to bring the perpetrators of this crime to justice. He reiterates his call to all armed groups to end the fighting and lay down their weapons. The Secretary General reiterates the commitment of the United Nations to support the Central African authorities in their fight against criminality and impunity in line with MINUSCA's mandate. The Secretary General offers his condolences to the bereaved family and to the government of people of Burundi, and he wishes a speedy recovery to the injured soldier. And just to add on the CAR that this just was one of several serious. I know if you're starting to read the paper while I'm reading, I've lost you, Joe, but if you could read it on your tablet, that would make less noise. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Also on the CAR, in addition to the incident I just mentioned, another peacekeeper, MINUSCA was attacked in 2 other incidents, one in Bangi's 4th district and one en route to Bangui from Bosentele. The latter one resulted in exchange of fire with MINUSCA personnel and 1 peacekeeper slightly injured. The mission has intensified patrolling activities near the National Transitional Council. Beyond the capital, peacekeepers continue to monitor the attempted movements of armed groups. With regard to elections, MINUSCA continues to work with the National Electoral Authority, and so far 82.7% of eligible voters have reportedly been registered. MINUSCA continues to be on high alert and to protect key installations and personalities, including key government buildings, the international airport, and protection of civilians hotspots. Turning to the DRC, as you will have seen, the head of UN mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Martin Kobler, just briefed the Security Council for the last time in his function. He said he was departing with a feeling of satisfaction and pride, but also with the sense that the mission's mandate has not been fulfilled yet, as he could not say with certainty whether progress attained is sustainable. This council also heard from Said Djinnit, the special envoy for the Great Lakes, and their remarks are available in my office, and my understanding is that Mr. Kobler will speak to you at the stakeout afterwards. On South Sudan, the UN mission in that country, UNMISS, reports hearing mortar shells yesterday morning in Malakal and Upper Nile State, coming from the direction of the west bank of the Nile River. The mission says it is not in a position to confirm who was shelling. Also in Malakal, the mission reports the arrival of some 260 internally displaced persons with the protection of civilians' sites in one day, coming from the west bank of the Nile, fleeing violence as well as food insecurity. There are currently more than 45,000 residents sheltering the protection of civilian sites in Malakal, with some 185,000 people in sites across the country. And ahead of a high-level EU meeting tomorrow, the High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling on EU member states to ensure that all discussions on migration policy are grounded firmly on the need to protect human rights. Zaid Ra'ad Al Hussein urged the EU and member states to move away from the flawed view of law enforcement as the main or sole panacea to contemporary migration challenges, especially when so many people are fleeing their countries of origin because of serious human rights violations or decaying or collapsing economies. The High Commissioner said that narrow exclusion-focused policies have clearly failed. Increasing border control and surveillance have not reduced the number of new arrivals, but have forced them to use more dangerous routes, leading to increased human rights abuses and the loss of life. And our humanitarian colleagues in Afghanistan inform us that the road between Kunduz and Puli Kumari in Afghan's Baghlan province has been open to traffic for the first time in a week of fighting, allowing people to leave Kunduz. The number of people fleeing from Kunduz cannot be ascertained due to high insecurity. And aid organizations are responding to the needs of those displaced from Kunduz in Mazar-e-Sharif, Taloqan, and Kabul, and are preparing for a further influx of displaced people into those areas. And you will have seen that yesterday we issued a statement where the Secretary General welcomed the election of Mr. Hoo-sung Lee of the Republic of Korea as chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. Mr. Lee will guide the panel's work on assessing the science related to climate change. And there's also a note welcoming Mr. Lee's election by Achim Steiner, the head of the UN Environment Program. Khalas. Yes, ma'am.
Would you please talk about the John Ash allegation? I'm aware of the fact that you talked about it yesterday because I asked one of the colleagues, but I don't found any video for the noon briefing from yesterday on Videos in Demand.
There should be.
There is like a very small segment about things you said about the occupied Palestinian territories.
Well, you should. I mean, we can check on the web TV page, but I think we talked about it extensively yesterday.
But there is nothing in web.
All right.
TV
Well,
page.
we'll check it. It exists because I was here and the camera was on.
I know.
So
I know.
we'll figure that out. Okay. Nizar and then Edie and Matthew.
Thank you, Stefan. With regard to this announcement by Mr. Wilcheikh Ahmed, obviously he's dropped the peace and partnership agreement from his consideration. He mentioned 2216, the GCC initiative, and others. But can we do that this peace and partnership agreement is defunct?
I think the is that the violence in Yemen is continuing every day. More people are suffering. Not enough humanity.